Israel has carried out airstrikes in Yemen, targeting ports and energy infrastructure controlled by Houthi rebels. The Israeli military said it conducted 2 waves of attacks. Reports in Yemen say 9 people were killed. The Houthis, who are backed by Iran, have launched hundreds of missiles at Israel in the last year and also attacked shipping in the Red Sea. Elisabeth Kendall is a Middle East expert and president of Girton College at Cambridge University in the UK. And she told us more about these latest Israeli airstrikes.
These strikes are very significant because they are the 3rd time that Israel has now struck Houthi targets in Yemen. We first saw strikes in July and then again in September and now again this morning. What that tells us is that Israel is going back in harder every single time that the Houthis worry and continue their missiles and drones launched at Israel. So far, however, they're not proving very effective because the Houthis continue and persist in their attacks. The message that Israel is trying to get across, that nowhere is too far for us to reach and nothing is off limits, not even civilian infrastructure, is simply not deterring the Houthis.
Now, according to a military official, the strikes were a pre-planned response to months of Houthi aggression. Tell us more about the Houthi attacks against Israel.
Thus far, the Houthis have launched over 200 missiles against Israel and almost as many drones, about 170 drones. Not many of them are actually getting through the Israeli defense systems, but some of them do. And of course, Israel has a zero tolerance policy. But this isn't the only thing that the Houthis are doing. Of course, ever since November last year, they've also been launching attacks against shipping in the Red Sea, which is positioned as the Houthis defending Gaza and Palestine against Israeli attacks, and therefore taking it out on not only ships bound for Israel, but on allies of Israel. So the Houthis now are in a slightly stronger position, oddly, because they're taking more of a leadership role within Iran's so-called axis of resistance, now that many of those other members have been all but decimated. These are, for example, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the defenders of the Assad regime in Syria, and of course, Hamas itself in Gaza, not to mention Iran.
Now, Israel has also been criticized for attacking Yemen. Human Rights Watch say some of the strikes have been disproportionate and also affected civilians. What's your take?
Yes, Israeli strikes on Yemen are far more damaging than similar airstrikes that have been conducted since January by the United States, also some of them in conjunction with the United Kingdom. And of course, over 25,000 airstrikes launched by Saudi Arabia against Yemen in 7 years of the last decade, during which a civil war has raged in Yemen. But Israeli airstrikes are, by some estimates, about 25 times more damaging on infrastructure and on life than those other airstrikes. This is important because Yemen is in a crisis situation. Over 19 million of its population, that's about 2/3 of the population, need humanitarian aid, and more than 90% of its staples are brought in by sea and by these ports that are being damaged. So this is going to have a terrible impact on the humanitarian situation in Yemen.
Now, Iran is currently significantly weakened. What influence does this have on the Houthis that are backed by Iran?
Yes, Iran is significantly weakened, and Iran is the major backer of the Houthis in Yemen. However, it's important to remember that the Houthis have a significant arsenal that they have built up of weaponry, and they also have great experience at weathering airstrikes from Saudi Arabia, from the US, from the UK. They know how to deal with this. And they also have the capacity to produce weapons and arms inside Yemen. All right, they won't be as sophisticated, but that doesn't matter because the war that the Houthis are waging is clearly asymmetric. All they need to do is to keep going. They don't need to be accurate. They don't need to be sophisticated. And for them, not losing is winning.
Now, briefly, if you can, you touched upon this, but what's the role of Saudi Arabia in this conflict?
Saudi Arabia has been involved in a war against the Houthis since 2015. Now, there was a truce signed between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia in 2022. That has expired, but it has largely held. Saudi Arabia now is trying very hard to fully exit the Yemen war. It's expensive. It doesn't allow Saudi enough bandwidth to focus on its own Vision 2030, on developing Red Sea tourism. So it wants to get out. And for that reason, it's quite careful not to antagonize the Houthis at this point in time. So it's playing a very careful game where it needs to walk a tightrope between looking like it's encouraging the Houthis and still wanting to come down hard on them so that they don't start directing their missiles against its own territory.
The Middle East expert, Elisabeth Kendall there from Cambridge University. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us.